College football marked its 100th birthday in 1969. To help celebrate this anniversary, the University of Oklahoma conducted a poll among its fans to find out who they thought were the greatest players in OU history. Ballots were printed in each of the 5 home game programs, and fans were asked to vote for the 11 best offensive players as well as the 11 best defensive players. They were also asked to ballot for the greatest single team ever to wear the big red colors.
Oklahoma football goes back 12 years before statehood to 1895 when John Hartz of Winfield, Kansas both coached and captained an OU squad. The Sooners have fielded a team every year since that time, and the 1969 team was the 75th consecutive edition. Since that time, OU has had 16 coaches and 49 authentic All-Americans. The first was Spot Geyer, a fullback who made the team in 1915. The latest, Steve Owen, Steve Zabel, and Ken Mendenhall, all who were named various all-star teams in 1969. Out of this come the names of 20 men who have been selected the best, including 2 who made both offensive and defensive teams. First, let's take a look at the defensive unit.
At the defensive end positions on this all-star team, there's both past and present. The past is represented by Frankie Anderson. Anderson, who wore number 82, played his high school football in Oklahoma City. 200-pound All-American is one of just a few who played 4 years at OU. He was a fine blocker and pass catcher, but his reputation came in stopping the other team. In 1950 against Kansas, watch Anderson, in white at right end, dump the Jayhawk ball carrier to stop a sweep. Same team, same game a little bit later on. Anderson, still at right end, drives a sweep inside and is still able to trip the ball carrier, resulting in still another loss. Anderson could rush the passer. No better example than this one coming up against Boston College as the Sooners opened the 1950 campaign. Before the quarterback can turn around, Anderson in the dark jersey has ripped him for a loss to spoil the play.
Representing the present at the other end spot is Steve Zabel. A surprise perhaps not from the standpoint of quality, but from the standpoint of time spent at the position. Still, voters were impressed by Zabel's play, which turned a mediocre defense into a great one and paved the way for a conference title in 1968. Time after time, the Thornton, Colorado product came up with a big play, like the blocked field goal attempt against Kansas in the 1968 game at Lawrence. Anderson and Zabel, 2 worthy choices at defensive end.
Jim Weatherall is the choice at one defensive tackle spot. Who else? The 230-pound All-American from White Deer, Texas, won the Outland Trophy as the nation's best lineman in 1951. He played both ways, but number 71 was perhaps most noticeable on defense. We've been able to isolate him on these film clips to show you what he meant to the Sooner forward wall. Here against Texas, he almost ignores his blocker to put pressure on the ball carrier. It helps to account for a resulting loss. Against Missouri now, although the play is to the other side, Weatherall still makes it his business to break it up. Again against Texas. Weatherall's pass rush is so severe that the quarterback has no recourse other than to throw the ball away to avoid a long loss.
Opposite Weatherall, the defensive tackle, is Wade Walker, who began his career at OU when Bud Wilkinson did in 1947. In fact, Walker was named a co-captain in his first year with the Sooners. A 203-pounder from Gastonia, North Carolina, Walker excelled on both offense and defense. Walker wore number 70, and in the ball game against Texas A&M in 1949, he roars down the field on the kickoff to rip the Aggie ball carrier before he can get started. A unanimous All-American in 1949, Walker is shown again killing an Aggie runner by pinching the middle and closing the hole, then making the tackle. Walker was so well thought of, he not only made this all-time team a defensive tackle, but was named to the second-team offense at tackle as well.
One of the guard positions is J.D. Roberts, a 210-pounder from Jesuit High School in Dallas. Roberts played both ways, and in his senior season of 1953 was named the Lineman of the Year by both AP and UPI. He also won the Outland Trophy as the nation's Lineman of the Year. Roberts anchored the Sooner defensive line. Here in 1953 against Colorado, number 64 wards off his block and fills the hole, holding the ball carrier to no gain. Roberts was particularly effective at rushing the passer. A perfect example of the quick, tough guards turned out by Gomer Jones, Roberts pressures the Colorado passer so severely, the hurried throw is intercepted by Larry Grigg and returned deep into Buff territory. J.D. Roberts came up with the big play time after time. Here, still against Colorado, Roberts blocks a punt, and even though the kicker is able to catch the ball in the air, Roberts has recovered enough to help spill it.
The top vote getter at guard was Granville Liggins, a runaway choice. Granny was the pin that held the 1967 defensive machine together as they rolled to a conference championship and an Orange Bowl win. Liggins and the term quickness were synonymous. The middle guard from Tulsa made sure the middle of the OU defense wasn't a safe place for opponents to try. Liggins weighed 216 pounds in his senior year, but it must have seemed like 260 to quarterbacks like Bill Bradley, who felt his wrath on this play in the 1967 Texas game. Against Colorado, Liggins, number 66, intimidates both center and quarterback before the snap. When it is snapped, Liggins destroys the blocker and hits both the quarterback and halfback simultaneously, causing a fumble, which OU recovered. Then in a tight scramble at Nebraska, Liggins, in the white uniform now, blunts a Husker drive by pinning their fullback for a 7-yard loss.
At one of the linebacker positions is Jerry Tubbs, the key to the great defensive machines that produced 2 straight national champions in 1955 and 1956. Tubbs, a 206-pound All-American from Breckenridge, Texas, is one of only 2 members on this all-time team never to have played in a losing game at OU. Jerry Tubbs was a quick and vicious tackler. Against Notre Dame, Paul Hornung's off-tackle run comes to an abrupt halt when Tubbs, number 53 in the white, hits him. Now against Iowa State in 1956, and still in the white, Tubbs intercepts a Cyclone pass and shows his running ability with a 78-yard touchdown run. Tubbs played fullback as a sophomore in 1954, and as a senior won the Walter Camp Award as the nation's best football player. He was also named Lineman of the Year in 1956. Even though he could run, it was his ability to wreck the opposition that made him so great. In 1955 against Kansas, Tubbs, number 53 in the dark jersey in the top left-hand corner of your screen, blitzes and throws Wally Stroud for a loss with one arm. Now in white against Texas, Longhorn quarterback Walt Fondren rolls out, but Tubbs drops the play with still another bone-jarring tackle.
Joining Tubbs at the other linebacker spot is another Texan who was almost a carbon copy. Carl McAdams from White Deer stood 6'3" and weighed 215. He was as much a one-man defense as any player who ever wore the red and white. A unanimous All-American, McAdams is the only player who made this all-time team who never played for a conference champion. Against Texas, McAdams hits fullback Ernie Coy at the goal line, stopping a 4th down effort and giving the ball to the Sooners. Now against Missouri, McAdams intercepts a Gary Lane pass and returns it deep into Tiger territory. Unlike Tubbs, McAdams could concentrate on defense alone, and concentrate he did. Against Pittsburgh in 1965, McAdams covers the width of the field to make a smothering tackle, forcing a loss on an attempted sweep.
Turning to the deep secondary, one of the halfback positions was nailed down by number 25, Bobby Boyd. This 180-pounder from Garland, Texas, made all-conference playing both ways in 1959. An exciting runner as a quarterback, Boyd used this attribute in making the big play when the other team had the ball too. Boyd wasted no time in showing what he could do. In his first game as a sophomore in 1957, Boyd, in white, made this great leaping interception to blunt a Panther drive. He was perhaps at his best, though, on punt returns. Against Kansas in 1959, John Hadel of the Jayhawks punting, and Bobby Boyd fielding the kick on his own 20-yard line. Boyd found the wall and scampered 44 yards at the Jayhawk 36. Moments later, he scored the only TD of the game in a 7-6 squeaker. In 1958, as a junior, Boyd helped ruin Dan Devine's first appearance in Norman by cruising 38 yards for a six-pointer as the Sooners rolled to a 39-0 win. His ability to make the big play on defense was to lead him to greater glory as a top-notch All-Pro with the Baltimore Colts.
Perhaps the most versatile athlete to be named to this all-star team is the other defensive halfback, Clendon Thomas. Number 35 played high school football for Southeast in Oklahoma City. This 188-pound All-American led the nation in scoring in 1956 and is currently ranked as the third best ground gainer of all time at OU. But as good as he was on offense, his credentials were just as good defensively. Watch the 1957 Nebraska game as Thomas, in white, covers a Husker pass play so fast and hits the receivers so hard the ball is jarred loose and the centers recover. Now against Notre Dame in 1956, again in white, Jim Morris of the Irish tries a sweep, but Clendon reacts too quickly. He's able to drop the ball carrier for a loss. But as he was on offense, Thomas was a streak in the open field on defense as well. Notre Dame again. Paul Hornung passes. Thomas intercepts. He's off to the races on a 35-yard journey to pay dirt. As a sophomore in 1955, Thomas, in the dark jersey on the next play, fields an Oklahoma A&M punt and zips 65 yards for the touchdown. Whether on offense or defense, Clendon Thomas takes his rightful place as one of OU's all-time greats.
The smallest man to make this all-star team is Buddy Jones. He came to OU from Holdenville, and he weighed but 158 pounds. But that didn't stop him from playing safety for the 1950 national champions, or from making a number of All-American teams, or from playing both ways when the occasion demanded. Jones possessed that intangible quality that put him in the right place most of the time. 1950, Jones fields a punt and makes a dazzling return to set up a score in the 28-0 season opening win against the Boston College Eagles in Norman. Watch number 33 in action again, this time in the white, in 1949 at Lawrence against Kansas. OU'd come from behind in the fourth period, and the Jayhawks were playing catch-up. Plays like this from Jones killed out any chances of a comeback. We'll take a look at the offensive team now in just a moment. Offensively at tight end is Max Boydstun, a Muskogee product who played 4 years for OU. Boydstun, who wore number 41 and weighed in at 207 his senior year, played both fullback and end, but it was at end that he was a consensus All-American in 1954. A superb blocker, he combined better than average speed with great hands to become a fine receiver with a team that didn't throw that much. Against California in 1954, the Sooners in white were backed up to their own 13-yard line, leading only 7-6. The bread-and-butter halfback pass run with Buddy Leak hitting Boydstun on an 87-yard spectacular that led to a 27-13 win. Now, later that same season, against Nebraska, OU in the dark jerseys, from the OU 29-yard line, Gene Callum lofted a bomb which was speared by Boydstun for a 52-yard gain to the Husker 19. Max Boydstun, a perfect forerunner of what we know today as a tight end.
Named as the split end was another native Oklahoman, Eddie Hinton, who broke 6 different school records on his way to becoming the greatest receiver in OU history. Hinton, a 6'1", 200-pounder from Lawton, wore number 33 and was a starter for both Jim McKenzie and Chuck Fairbanks during his 3-year stay in Norman. Hinton, it seemed, could catch any ball thrown near him. Against Iowa State a year ago, Hinton fielded a Bobby Womack aerial with one hand for a 26-yard gain. The hand, by the way, was broken at the time. But what he did after he caught the ball was just as spectacular. Against Colorado, OU in white, Hinton took this pass from Womack and with some fancy footwork left two buffs sprawling on the way to a 59-yard gain. Hinton is the perfect complement to Boydstun at the end position.
The only man to make the all-time OU squad, both offensively and defensively, other than Jerry Tubbs, is Jim Weatherall. The giant from White Deer, Texas, weighed 230 pounds while playing both ways. His blocking ability was one of the reasons OU finished in the top 10 in rushing nationally during all three of his playing years. He also kicked extra points in both his junior and senior seasons, hitting 39 of 47 attempts.
Joining Weatherall at the other offensive tackle spot is Ralph Neely, standing 6'5", weighing 243. Neely was named Sophomore Lineman of the Year in 1962 and was named to a number of All-American teams in both his junior and senior seasons. The Farmington, New Mexico product was extremely quick and agile, enough so that he was used as a pass receiver on the tackle-eligible play.
At one of the offensive guard spots is Bill Kreischer. Hailing from Midwest City, this 213-pounder was a perfect example of an OU guard under Gomer Jones. Tremendously quick, Kreischer was an exceptional one-on-one blocker who could also execute the trap block successfully. He was named as an All-American in both 1956 and 1957 and was one of 4 Sooners who made this all-time team to have played for 2 national champions. Watch Kreischer in action against Colorado in 1955, number 65 just to the right of the center. Watch as he drives his defensive man straight back, opening a gaping hole through which Dennett Morris scampers 23 yards and a Sooner touchdown. Now against Oklahoma A&M, Kreischer again just to the right of the center. Stands his man straight up with a vicious block, allowing the OU back to slide through for a first down inside the Aggie 10.
Lining up beside Kreischer at offensive guard is Buddy Burris, the first of 3 Muskogee Burris brothers who started at Oklahoma. Buddy dates back farther than any other player to make this all-time All-Star squad, seeing his first varsity action in 1946. In fact, of all the great players who have ever worn an OU uniform, Burris is the only one to make All-American 3 times.
Joining Jim Weatherall as the only players to make both the offensive and defensive teams is Jerry Tubbs. OU led the nation in rushing and in total offense in both 1955 and again in 1956. The great blocking of Tubbs opened many of the holes that allowed Sooner backs to post this sort of record.
Oklahoma has had many top quarterbacks, but the ones fans voted as the best of them all was another Muskogee resident, Eddie Crowder. Currently the head coach at Colorado, Crowder directed the 1952 powerhouse. Crowder wore number 16 and weighed 175 pounds in his senior year. Heady Eddie was a master faker and ball carrier. His favorite trick was to fake to the fullback up the middle, hiding the ball on his hip and dropping back to pass. Here in 1951 against Colorado, Crowder does just that on a 27-yard touchdown pass to Dick Hafley. Later in the same game, Crowder again faking beautifully, then spinning one good for 38 yards to Buddy Leak. Maybe Crowder wasn't the passer Claude Arnold or Bobby Womack were, but the threat of the run from Billy Vessels and Buck McPhail, plus his great faking, gave him the edge he needed to hit the open receiver, like in the 49-20 route of Texas in 1952 when he zeroed in on Buddy Leak for a 65-yard spectacular. But Crowder could run when the occasion presented itself. Against Colorado, Crowder scampered 43 yards when his receivers were covered. But it was his amazing ball handling ability that made eyes pop. Against Texas, watch him flip to Vessels on the famed split T option just as the end hits him. Certainly a worthy choice as the all-time quarterback.
The fastest man named to the all-time team is one of the starting halfbacks, Tommy McDonald. The 170-pound speedster is the only non-native in the starting backfield, coming from Albuquerque, New Mexico. McDonald was one of only 4 on this all-time team to have played on 2 national champions, and he won both the Maxwell Trophy and the Sporting News Award as Player of the Year in 1956. McDonald was one of those rare individuals who could run inside or outside with the same devastating results. Once in the open, it was usually all over. In 1955 against Pittsburgh, he travels 43 yards for 6 points. Again, McDonald works the inside with this 44-yard run against Texas in the 1956 45-0 rout. If he got to the outside, forget it. Here with Missouri the opponent, McDonald turns the corner 58 yards worth on the way to a 67-14 pasting of the Tigers. McDonald could also catch, as his years in the pros proved. Watch against Nebraska in 1956, as number 25 makes a fantastic catch of a Jimmy Harris bomb, resulting in a 46-yard touchdown play. And, of course, what halfback playing under Bud Wilkinson couldn't throw the running pass? McDonald to Clendon Thomas here for 11 yards and 6 points against Missouri.
Rounding out the offensive backfield are two Heisman Trophy winners. The first was Billy Vessels, who came to Norman by way of Cleveland, Oklahoma, and whose combination of power plus blinding speed made him college football's top player in 1952. The 185-pound slasher had a great sophomore year, and after missing 7.5 games because of injury in 1951, came all the way back to the top in his senior campaign. It was said that Vessels won the Heisman Trophy because of his performance against Notre Dame in 1952. Here, against the Irish, Billy the Kid fields a 28-yard pass from Crowder for his first score. On that day in South Bend, Vessels gained 195 yards rushing and scored 3 times. Here is the 62-yard scoring play on the bread and butter dive play that resulted in TD number 2. Vessels also turned another basic split T play into his third score of the afternoon. He palmed a pitch out from Crowder for a 47-yard scoring dash. But it was his explosiveness on the dive play that was Billy's trademark. In the 1950 game against Nebraska, Vessels erupted for a 30-yard gainer. Then on the very next play, Cleveland Curley displayed his passing prowess with a perfect strike to end John Riddell for 24 yards and 6 points. Even as a sophomore, Vessels was already started down the road to a spot on this team.
Perhaps it's fitting that the last position on this all-time OU football squad belongs to Miami's Steve Owens. Most of his achievements have been chronicled during the past few months. Suffice to say, this Heisman Trophy winner is the greatest ground gainer and scorer of all time. It didn't take football fans long to find out the Sooners had a great one. In his third game as a sophomore, Owens gave the Sooners a chance to beat Texas with this superb 56-yard run. A big play, already becoming a trademark with number 36. Opponents came to fear the unstoppable recklessness of his goal line charges. In 1967, Kansas led 10-0 until Owens led the Sooners on a long-distance march, climaxed by this 7-yard effort. He ran where the going was toughest, but there was no doubt he knew what to do in the open field, as you witness on this 27-yard trip against North Carolina State in 1968. But on the upcoming 24-yard play this season against Kansas State typifies Steve Owens. Finding room where there was none, getting the Sooners out of a hole, second effort unparalleled, sheer power, speed, and desire, a fitting close of the best 22 players produced from school where quality is the rule, not the exception.
Well, in voting for the all-time single team, the 1956 national champions were an overwhelming choice, far surpassing the vote tabulation of the 1949 team, which finished second. Other Sooner teams drawing quite a bit of support were the 1950 and 1955 national champions, the 1952 squad, and the 1967 Orange Bowl champions.
Although this all-time Sooner squad only bridged the span of years between 1946 and 1969, there were 343 nominations altogether, dating as far back as 1910. Billy Vessels was the top vote-getter, barely exceeding the votes tabulated by Steve Owens. Defensive halfback drew the most argument, with 49 different names being submitted. While the quarterback spot found the most agreement, there were only 8 names placed in nomination. The Versatility Award most certainly must go to Clendon Thomas, who not only made the first team on defense and the second team on offense, but drew votes for 5 different positions. While it was both nostalgic and exciting to watch old favorites again, there are those present-day fans who hope that the caliber of OU football will be such that all these names can be replaced within the next 25 years or so. And there are others, no matter what happens in the future, who will always have a very special place in their hearts for these 20 who have brought so many thrills and so much tradition to OU football. These indeed were OU gridiron greats.